everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Today on the show, I've got Chris Gwinn here with Midwest CFO. Chris, say hello. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me on the show today, Karl.
Yeah, Chris and I are real world friends, which it's always fun to do these recordings with people who I've actually gotten to shake hands with in real life and that I see somewhat regularly, both living in the Midwest and being involved in the Entrepreneurs Organization here in Chicago. And so great to see you in virtual and record you here. I'll sing your praises a bit more, Chris. I kind of got this idea to start this show based on a conversation we had and the podcast that you were running a few months ago. And so thanks for that. And this was it was a good inspiration. You sent me a lot of interesting things to help me get started. Tell me about your business today, though, Midwest CFO, and let's start with that, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the finer details.
Of course. So Midwest CFO, we are a fractional CFO firm helping businesses to grow, scale, and better position their business for an exit. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, digital agencies, really just B2B professional service companies, oftentimes it can be very challenging to understand your financials and ultimately set clear goals and make progress to those goals, because sometimes the economy doesn't really make sense. We're maybe not tracking things properly. We're not really understanding what our gross margin or how much we should be spending in each of these different categories. So it's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. And that's where we're helping folks to bring more clarity by helping them to better understand their financials, forecasting around kind of the strategic plan that we set, and then really holding them accountable and making progress and momentum, and then ultimately helping them to increase their top line growth, bottom line profitability, and ultimately prepare them for an exit. Not necessarily making it a requirement that they have to exit, but at least providing them with the financial flexibility and increasing the overall valuation of their company along the way.
So most of these are your customers are going to be small business owners like myself who run a small, let's say, service business. Maybe it's not necessarily a service business. And they typically, I imagine, come from more of the sort of tactician background, not a finance background, right? So, I mean, for me, I remember this starting my agency, like I had a friend who was recently graduated from Northwestern's MBA program, and I kind of figured out the financial modeling from him and ran it by him. And it was really helpful to kind of have somebody who was a actual like finance person review that stuff. I assume that's the kind of thing you're bringing to your clients, right?
100%. I mean, this is stereotyping a little bit, but like your typical like entrepreneur, business owner is usually an absolute expert at whatever the technical skill is or the technical thing that they are doing in servicing and selling as a product. As an example, if I run SEO or I run paid ads, I'm probably really, really good at driving inbound leads towards your website. Or if I'm maybe an owner of an HVAC company, I'm probably better at performing any of the diagnostic work or servicing your HVAC unit, ensuring that you can lower overall energy costs better than anywhere in kind of our local region. Yet, none of that actually requires any type of formal accounting, finance, or really understanding. And that's where it becomes a little bit daunting, to the point where I'm just going to sort of refuse to even look at them, at any of my financial statements, and which ultimately puts me in this position as a business owner where I'm making a lot of decisions based off of gut feel. Maybe it's peer pressure from employees saying, hey, we need to hire this person or we need more staff, yet I'm not really making any of these decisions based off of financial information and really driving growth, profitability, and how I want to manage the business forward. And so that's where oftentimes a great client for us is the folks that do want to take an effort to better understand their financials, do want to improve the overall business and just manage it more effectively towards their financial goals, and need a strategy in place.
Yeah. What are some of the financial maybe mistakes or oversights you see most often in small businesses? Just curious, because I've certainly had my own personal challenges there. You just said that managing off feelings. I remember early days, it was managing off of cash in the bank. If we had cash in the bank, I was feeling good and I was spending. If we didn't, I wasn't, and I was scared. And it's a little more sophisticated now. But anyway, what are some of the challenges or mistakes you see, small business owners making around their finances?
Let's maybe just start with some of the simpler, low-hanging fruit. But I think by default, the way that a lot of your accounting is typically set up is really the simplest way for it to be set up, and just from a compliance standpoint, where we're just making sure that all revenue is captured as revenue, all expenses are captured as expenses, and we're kind of breaking out payroll. Yet there's not really, oftentimes by default, and most business owners don't really have a clear breakout of where this revenue is coming from, what is the cost of service of, or the COGS, and for anyone who's selling maybe a particular product, of delivering this revenue, and what's the clean breakout of all the rest of my overhead. And because I would say 9 times out of 10, I'll talk with a prospect or a client and they'll tell me, yeah, well, I've got like 4 or 5 different service lines. They're all profitable. We're growing. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Glad to hear it. Yet I go into their financials just to put together a complimentary financial assessment. And I look at their financial statements or their P&L. I see one line item for revenue, which is a general black box. I have no idea what the makeup of that revenue is and kind of where all of your sales are coming from. And then they usually have some bucket for expenses for payroll, and then they have some for general admin, and then they have net income, and maybe a couple of other expenses. So it becomes, from my perspective, at first glance, I also do not know what your gross margin is. I do not know what you're actually making and what is your true top line revenue. Because if you don't understand your gross margin and ultimately how much profit you are generating per customer, it becomes really challenging to ultimately make a bottom line profit, because there's still additional sales or marketing expenses and other overhead expenses that you need in order to be able to either drive more sales or make the business easier to manage, or to be able to just make the entire rest of the operations work and ensure that you actually have some profit. So I would say one is really just honing in on what is your gross margin? And honestly, that usually comes back to just making sure that we can actually clean up your overall accounting, have that clearly broken out so you know how much revenue you're generating from each of the different service lines or product lines. You know what the costs are to be able to service each of those different products or service lines, and then just having clean breakouts for all of your SG&A expenses. The other thing that I often see with a lot of business owners is just ineffective, really cash management and forecasting and kind of planning around kind of future expenditures and just managing their overall cash and liquidity. And a lot of times, one, that's kind of driven in part by usually poor collection processes or accounts receivable, or maybe they just don't have a great payment processing option in place. So if possible, you always want to make sure that we can set up automatic or reoccurring payments instead of sending out invoices and trying to track those invoices down. And then, oh crap, I forgot to even send that invoice. And then now it's been 90 days and this client isn't paying me. So all those issues clearly impact your cash flow. But being able to just better and proactively plan for upcoming future expenditures and just making sure that you have adequate liquidity and cash in the business to ensure your business and operations run smoothly and can weather any type of economic storm or potential loss of a customer.
Yeah, that's really, I think you're kind of hitting there at the end on some of the reasons to do this. Because I think the counter argument that I hear sometimes, and I don't hear this from very sophisticated business owners, but people just starting out is, man, that's a lot of work to track all that stuff. And I'm busy, I'm, barely keeping up, and maybe they've just got a very simple bookkeeping process, and they really don't want to have to go break down everything by, different lines of revenue and all that. But at the end of the day, Chris, and to your point, if you're going to try to sell this business, you're going to need to do all this. If you're going to try to get financing from a bank for something, or you want to make a big capital expense, or you just want to know how much money you can really realistically reinvest into growth, you kind of have to have this stuff, right?
100%. And honestly, it starts to open and change how we're managing the business. It moves it more into kind of a strategic level where before it's like, hey, I just need to send more sales. Do I know what service line I want to send them to? And let's just continue to send it to the black box. Instead, now we know, well, the service line A is actually our most profitable service line. And it actually happens to be our kind of lowest service line on a percentage of revenue. So it's maybe our smallest service line, yet it's our most profitable. That would probably be the one that we want to drive as many sales and as many leads as possible, trying to better identify maybe the ideal customer profile, how we can potentially better service those clients, and just continue to nurture and generate more and more leads and be able to refine the sales process around there. And then on the opposite side, there's probably another service line that's probably your least profitable service line. So then that changes the dialogue and the conversations around, well, how can there's only two different options to be able to improve your gross margin. It's either A, increase prices, B, lower costs, but it's usually not as simple as one or the other. It's usually kind of a balanced approach, but then it kind of changes the conversation into, well, what can we be doing to be able to like potentially become more productive, maybe increase the overall capacity of our team, or be able to potentially increase prices around these service lines? Is this even the right service for us to be able to even offer if it's not there's some often I've seen sometimes where it's not even just not profitable. You are actually losing money because you are offering this service line. So that's more of an extreme example, but without better understanding what's your gross profit for each of your service lines and having a clean breakout, it's really challenging to be able to even make any of those decisions in the first place.
Totally. Actually, I've heard this a number of times where people are like, yeah, this line of business loses us money, but it enables this other line of business, or it is so, it's so helpful to sort of like to certain clients who are important to us that we keep it anyway. And so there's always like a little bit of, I think this is where the blend of having good financial oversight mixed with good entrepreneurial intuition kind of comes in together, right? Like at the end of the day, it's not one or the other. It's both together that make you really powerful as an operator and really able to scale and grow your business. At least that's my 2 cents as the non-CFO in the room.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, it's okay to maybe have one service line that is a little bit less profitable if it ultimately kind of just opens the door, but you definitely want to make sure that we're at least making a profit on that.
Right.
Right. We can't be pricing it so low where it's almost turning into like any customer acquisition cost to the point where we're actually losing money. Yeah. And so you do want to make sure that we're indeed making money on that. It doesn't have to necessarily be your highest service line if ultimately like the entry point is always this service line, and then they always we cross-sell them or we convert them into more of that's kind of the natural progression. Is usually it's like some type of like one-time project. It's okay if it's a little bit of somewhat of a loss leader, lower margin. If it ultimately turns into reoccurring, you convert that service line into maybe it's like a website design project and then SEO and content. It would be okay if the website design, maybe a one-time project in nature, is a little bit lower profit than your SEO that's more reoccurring in nature, but you still want to make sure that you're not losing money and it's not dragging your entire gross margin down.
Right. And especially, again, going back to if you ever want to sell this business and, your buyer starts to dig into your financials. And again, I've been through this a couple of times looking through financials of businesses to buy. And you see something like that, like a certain service lines, all of a sudden you realize it's losing money or you can't see how it's making money. It's a orange flag, at least. And it could be a red flag. And if you're the seller, just understanding why this is a loss leader or an intentionally lower profit service, really helpful, because then you can add context and you're not just lost and like gonna lose credit for that revenue, which is very likely what a buyer's gonna try to do. So I could geek out on financial stuff because this is an area I'm still learning a ton about, and every time we talk, Chris, I get free advice from you, so I always love that. But I won't bother everybody with that on the podcast because our main goal here is to understand more about the service business that you've started. So tell me about how you got into this with Midwest CFO. Were you a CFO or did you have a finance background? Give me a little bit of what led you to this and help you see this opportunity.
I'm a CFA by trade, or that's the kind of the designation that I have. It's kind of like a corporate finance, FP&A, investment equivalent of the CPA exam. And so leading up to even starting my first company, Great Lakes Advisory, spent my entire career in corporate finance, investment banking, was director of finance and operations for a couple of years for a small business before ultimately starting Great Lakes Advisory. And so I've always really, really enjoyed financials and helping folks to be able to gain more clarity and really analyzing all the numbers and figuring out strategies in order for us to be able to move the needle and make progress on that. Ultimately kind of started my first business more so that it felt like there was a lot of need and there was a lot of demand around this service, yet and I guess maybe just taking a step back. My first business, Great Lakes Advisory, was really a operations consulting business. So focused a lot on SOP documentation or SOP, standard operating procedures, process documentation, training development, process improvement, change management. And it is a large need. A lot of folks in the market need this because they don't currently have it. Most training, onboarding, documentation of all your processes just simply doesn't exist. The challenge, I think, with that initial business model that ultimately kind of frustrated me a little bit, and it just ultimately was not my passion, wasn't necessarily my true core expertise. My expertise is really around finance and compared to maybe operations. But I think the challenge with a business model like that is that it's a little bit more one-time in nature, and it ultimately has a very long tail, I guess, benefit. And what I'm trying to get at here is that the time between when a customer purchases your product or service and the true ROI or the value or the benefit is extremely long with that initial business model, in the sense that I can document all these processes, or I can put together all this content, yet, or all this training content, yet the benefit is not realized on the purchase date. The benefit is realized after 10 employees go through, and another 10 employees go through, and another 10 employees. So it's like a much, much longer strategy. So the fact that it was a little bit more like one time in nature, I didn't necessarily love the work, just made it a little bit challenging, but I think it provided for some fantastic entrepreneurial learning experiences when it comes to figuring out a business model and a service offering that ultimately makes sense, and it can ultimately help you to achieve whatever your potential business goals are. And for me, it's really being able to better serve our clients, being able to create something that's more reoccurring in nature, a little bit more predictable, and ultimately, I'm providing value for our clients. And I mean, that's kind of some of the core themes for me. And I think through the financials, all the financial work, it makes it a little bit easier to be able to manage because it's more based off of like a monthly and a quarterly and an annual type of cadence that's ultimately driving more progress there.
Yeah. So and this is interesting because we met when you had started Great Lakes Advisory, and it was still pretty early on. You kind of worked at that for a couple of years, I think, and then you've shut it down mostly now, or it's completely shut down, right?
No, I sold the business earlier this year.
Sold it. Okay. So sold it and then started Midwest CFA. And I remember talking to you a number of times, and it's night and day, the difference. I remember talking to you a number of times while you were trying to, running Great Lakes, and you're kind of just like struggling to get, people like customers on board and get people to see the value of it. And like, just feeling like you're pushing a boulder up a hill. And then Midwest CFA, and 6 months into that, and you were like, man, this is crazy. It's taking off. It's like, people get it. Like, it's that night and day difference.
Midwest CFO.
Or Midwest CFO. I'm so sorry.
No, there you go.
Midwest CFO, of course. But tell me a little more about that. And you kind of touched on it there. It's like, because Midwest CFO is delivering something where within a month, we're going to get you, better financial insight into your business. I'm imagining that's an easier call to action, or like sort of deliverable that people see value from earlier on. Is that right?
Yeah, I think a huge difference between kind of the model that I originally started with Great Lakes Advisory and Midwest CFO is that you need to be able to build a service offering around a need in the market that is known by your customers. And if your customers don't know that they need this, that this issue isn't glaringly obvious, that in its invoking like true real pain, then it just requires a tremendous amount of education to be able to actually break through of that service. I mean, you could tell me that like, hey, I've got the best possible service for this super, super niche product, yet if no one else in your market or no one else in the industry realizes that they need this, it's going to be really, really challenging to be able to actually deliver value, making and build more of a reoccurring or just more repeat business if your customers aren't raising their hand in a crowded room saying, hey, I absolutely need this today. And we're talking about it at a leadership team level, or I'm hearing it from all of my employees, and I need to solve this today. If the problem that you're trying to solve or the service you're trying to deliver is something that's really easy to just punt to next year, or maybe doesn't necessarily, I guess, require you to stop today to solve it, it's going to be challenging, I think, in general.
Totally. I saw that a lot with starting my first business. And one of the things I took away from that experience, which is very similar to what you just said, Chris, is it is much easier to sell a service into a company that has a line item set for this in their budget already than to try to convince them to add a new line item for an entirely new service that they don't currently budget in. And I didn't really appreciate that because I had worked most of my career at early stage startups where there wasn't really budgets. It was just like, what do you think we need? Let's go find somebody to do it and do it. And we'd raise big chunks of money and we'd spend a bunch of money and then we'd run out of money. And it was like the totally different way of doing finances. But then when I realized it, as I started selling to more corporate clients, is like, oh, this middle manager literally can't add a line item to their budget. They would have to go through so many hoops and it would take years to do. Whereas if they've already got that line item, they just haven't found a good way to answer, like to fill that budget. You just tell them, here's what we can do for $50,000, and boom, it fits right in. It's amazing the difference. And I'm imagining that's kind of some of what you're seeing too, is like people know it's a problem. They've got budget for it. They just can't find the right person to do it.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of that comment, it's not only important for the business to know that this problem exists, but I think it's really important that the owner or the primary decision makers or whoever is authorizing a purchase of your product or service actually knows that this problem exists and they are actively seeking to be able to solve that. And the reason that I bring that up is that even in my last business, one of the other kind of challenges that I actually encountered was that I would sell to a business owner for kind of building out this entire, like all these SOPs, all these processes, all these training, yet I would be working with more of their direct frontline employees that also felt a little bit intimidated, fearful that potentially I'm trying to replace their job because I'm trying to kind of document all of their work. So there was, I think, this subtle animosity and some resistance and insecurities from some of those frontline employees that ultimately it's really challenging for them to just, or for me to even expect for them to just have this great experience that I'm trying to provide my work with them, have it funnel back up to ultimately the decision maker or kind of the authority. So it really needs to be issues or problems that are solved and known at the leadership team level. And that's going to be like your CFO, your CEO, your COO, your CMO, HR, IT, sales, those bigger operations, any of those like bigger problems that are known.
Yeah, that's fantastic insight, Chris. And I think that's a really good lesson for people who are just starting out and trying to figure out how to position their service or how to sell it into the first few customers. Speaking of first few customers, let's talk about it. You've gotten, we talked briefly before this, but you've kind of filled up your own pipeline here and you've got a pretty good book of business going. Tell me about how you've acquired the first few customers. Was it primarily people in your network or were you doing some other marketing efforts? Like what's worked so far?
So far, it's probably been about 80% of my network and probably 10% of like my marketing and some inbound leads. But when you're first getting started with a business, there's a lot that you don't know. There's a lot when it comes down to the service offering, a lot that comes down to the pricing and kind of how it's all works. I mean, you can put together the most elaborate, brilliant business plan in theory, yet the only thing that really matters is, does this work for your audience? Does this work for your customers? And so
Yep.
during the same time, while I sold and was kind of transitioning to exit of my last business, I reached out to a handful of folks that I believed and I thought that I could work really, really well with. And so I limited that to kind of three like complementary service engagements where it was limited in scope. It was only for about 2 months that ultimately I can put together a super high quality service in exchange for a review, testimonial, some more feedback on kind of this service offering. And I guess ultimately deep down, I'm also hoping that these are the right fit clients that I actually can convert into paying customers. And that's ultimately what happened. But I use that strategy to better define the service offering first and better figure out some of the pricing, how it all works, how the overall cadence and how I'm going to service these clients. Got some really, really helpful feedback along the way. And I also received some social proof because a lot of times when you're first getting started, everyone, your customers are going to say, hey, who have you worked with? And if you don't have, well, actually, you're just the first person I'm working with. It's usually a little bit challenging to break through compared to saying, yep, I've serviced like a handful of other clients. Here's 5-star reviews. Here's their testimonials. Here's their experience, and love to be able to provide a similar level of experience for you. So I grew it from that. Plus, I also figured out very early on and did a lot of like research in leading up to the ultimate launch of Midwest CFO around kind of the target audience, the ideal customer profile. And once you can define where that market is, where that target audience, those ICPs, I think then you can figure out, well, what are some other professions, maybe professional services that are also interfacing and overlap with your same audience. And that's where I started to figure out kind of bookkeepers were really a really good resource for us. I figured out that EOS implementers were also a really good resource or referral partner for us. Some of the fractional like CMO community was really, really good because they're all working with a very similar target audience that I had. And my approach to networking is always trying to really collect IOUs in the sense that I'm going to try to add value for you first and feel that you almost owe me for this potential referral that I introduced to you. So I always I reach out. I'm very methodical and mindful of like who I'm doing this with, but I'll take time. I'll connect with these professions or these potential referral partners, and I'll take the time just to better understand who's their target audience, who's their ideal customer profile, how does your service engagement work, what's an ideal referral look like for you, and then during that conversation, I always try to just add value first before asking for anything in exchange. And then when I do need something, or if I can just stay top of mind with this individual and I share a little bit about our offering, a little bit about our ICP, our target audience, then it becomes a little bit easier for them to then be able to pass along referrals for me. So I've generated a lot of referrals just from networking other trade groups like that.
I love that. There's a lot of good insights from what you just said there, Chris. I mean, the way I think about it is if my client is making a purchasing decision that is related or they're solving a related problem, how do I get in front of the kinds of people who they'd go to for that? So you're exactly what you're saying. It's like if I think I need a bookkeeper, and maybe in reality I need a CFO and a bookkeeper, but like I kind of think I need a bookkeeper right now. That's probably a great point to also talk to somebody at the CFO level to talk about like what else you can do with those books, because books alone are not going to give you the insight. You kind of need a little bit of a higher understanding, right? And usually somebody guiding the bookkeeper on how to best do it and keep things organized. So that makes a ton of sense. And then I love the adding value first and then making the ask when, it is, I hesitate to say like they owe you one, because I never try to come off that way, right?
I mean,
I know what you mean,
like
though.
I guess and I'm saying that more from a theoretical perspective. I'm not saying directly, bluntly, hey, you owe me for this.
Yeah.
But I think
right.
the power of like being a really, really good networker is just delivering value, helping out your network, establishing kind of maybe a handful, maybe it's like 10, 20 really close-knit referral relationships. Ask or really deliver value for them first without asking for anything in exchange. Stay top of mind. And then if they do come across someone who is an ideal fit for you, they're going to somewhat feel that, hey, this person has already added a lot of value to me, that we're staying top of mind. We've touched base maybe every, 8 to 12 weeks. And I know that this is a good, one of my prospects, one of my clients mentions that they need this service offering. It becomes much easier for them to then send that referral your way. So another piece of that too, which is making those referrals as easy as possible. One requirement that I always make within my network is I'll send those referral partners a kind of a one-page overview of kind of our service offering. It breaks down each of the pain points that we solve, the ideal customer profile, the target audience, and then I also share with them a simple email template that introduces me the way that I want to be introduced, so that they don't have to spin their wheels and spend even more time when they crafting an email, reviewing notes, looking back at my website to be able to introduce me to someone who actually might be a really good fit for me. And then I always just request the same from them and tell them that, hey, if you want to you can steal the same exact template, just reword it for yourself. I always save that to my CRM or HubSpot, and I've got that as a template. So then anytime I come across a good referral fit for Karl Hughes, I just immediately tee up that intro, and it saves me a ton of time and ultimately adds a lot of value.
I love that. I think you've got this really systematized, and I appreciate that. I've always been a very systematized networker, which some people, struggle with that and aren't as like, I live in my CRM. I have both a personal one and like business one, and just all that. And I think it's for me super helpful. So, to those listening, maybe you're not that style, and you're not quite as procedural as Chris and I are. That said, the sort of overarching lesson here, I think, is being I think about like you're a hub of information. I think actually this happened to me recently. I messaged out in a group that we're both in, a WhatsApp group, and you immediately had like a couple recommendations and sent introductions that were really, helpful and in line with what I was looking for. And that just makes me think, Chris, he's a connector. He's the kind of person who would know somebody who does X, Y, or Z. And that makes me come back to you, but also keeps you top of mind for if somebody needs CFO services, you're the one I'm going to think of, just because we've talked so many times, we've had good, positive interactions. So I think that's a really cool hack or way of you're using, your strength as a networker to then build referrals in the business. So kudos on you.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of times a mistake that some folks make is, hey, I'm only going to have conversations with folks that are going to buy from me. But sometimes just delivering more value or education or seeing if you can help someone else out, even though they might not necessarily be your ideal customer profile, they might have some connections who are with you in your customer profile. And so I always just believe in being able to be selfless and pay it forward, trying to add value for anyone in my network without asking for anything in exchange. And if I can add value for you, ultimately I can help you get one step closer to wherever you're going to go. And hopefully maybe you'll think of me in the future. But if you don't, at least I feel good about myself that I've helped someone else out today.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So let's talk about the service delivery that you guys have. Obviously, one of the challenges that I imagine with a business like yours is that you're promising expertise from a pretty high level type professional, a CFO or CFO level thinker. So how do you execute the service today? Is it you primarily at this point? And what's your plan to kind of scale that beyond just you?
Yeah, it's 100% just me right now. So I'm wearing a lot of hats. I'm doing service delivery, doing marketing, doing sales,
Year one, no, everybody does this.
the whole kit and caboodle. So I guess taking a step back. So focusing on kind of how do I deliver the service is the first question. My approach for building out this service line, or like the fractional CFO service line, I think this can also apply to a lot of other different industries, is really anchoring how I'm servicing you to the outcomes and the goals that you want to be able to achieve. So when I first get started with any of our clients, we go through kind of a strategic plan exercise where we're clearly defining what do you want to accomplish over the next 1 and the next 3 years. And ultimately, we're using that as a North Star to be able to guide your business forward. I can't necessarily tell you that you have to go to the moon if you're not willing to leave your local county and you're not willing to be able to grow that. I can't tell you to go 100 miles an hour if you're not willing to go more than 5 miles an hour. So I can't force you to go somewhere that you don't want to go, but what I can do is if I can clearly define what your goals are, where the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, we can start to manage the business a little bit differently, and I can service you a little bit differently so that we can stay on track to whatever that outcome is that we are targeting. So my approach is first, very, very clearly, and I do part of it during the sales process where we're just identifying a lot of the issues that are in place. What are you trying to accomplish? How, and really just defining this current state versus that future state and being that bridge or that high impact gap that through this service delivery and really just positioning the service that, hey, this is kind of why it makes a lot of sense for you. And so then from the overall service delivery standpoint, I've structured it into kind of a couple of different touch points where, and the different service levels will vary depending on kind of the level of strategic planning that we're doing. Some of it is kind of only annual planning. Some of it is only like quarterly planning. Some of it is like the annual, quarterly, and weekly leadership team meetings, which is really underneath the EOS operating model. But I've structured it as such where we've got a couple of like scheduled, I guess, touch points or times when we are interfacing throughout the month. And then we're ultimately driving that. We're providing support outside of that and making sure that we're solving those issues. So I guess the way that I've kind of structured this is that I built out we've defined the outcomes. I built a forecast and a budget around those outcomes. And then I built a financial model that equips our business owners with insights into the profitability of each of the different service lines, how much they're spending, helping them to better benchmark, manage their entire labor force, and ultimately providing strategic insights from there. And then outside of that, it's really just helping them. I mean, there's some pieces of it that makes my work easier that I almost prerequisites. Ultimately, we're not really a true bookkeeping or accounting firm yet. I'm using a lot of accounting information and a lot of financial information that's provided by your accounting team. So another piece of that is really being the quarterback, if you will, of their entire finance and accounting team and just holding all those folks accountable so that we're working with clean financial data, that we're closing out our books on a timely basis, that we're collecting from our customers, taking care of our payables. So providing kind of that initial audits so we can better assess all the procedures that are in place and whether or not you have the right team and figuring out kind of a plan of action from there that ultimately makes it easier for me to then deliver my service longer term.
Yeah, awesome. And then what's the plan for starting to hire other people at your level? Will you hire like kind of more mid-level people who assist you with things, or will you end up hiring like more kind of higher level consultants that kind of are at your level that will just own accounts? Like, how do you envision that?
Yeah, I'm crystal clear on where I want to go with my entire vision. So my goal is to be able to grow this and scale this to beyond 75 total fractional CFOs. And during my goal this year is really just max out my own personal book of business and my personal client roster, and pretty close to being there today. Build up a little bit more cash, and then we're going to go very, very heavy next year into content marketing and really investing very heavily in our marketing. And the plans there are that I'm essentially going to build an in-house digital agency or marketing team all around content marketing, thought leadership, and really driving inbound leads for our ideal customer profiles. So the different industries that I'm planning to target with the other fractional CFOs where I've seen a lot of demand for the different industries. And then the plan then becomes a little bit easier than if I have this consistent lead generation funnel that's bringing in a handful of leads every single month. It becomes very easy then bring on the next CFO and the next CFO. And the way that I'm planning to structure all of this is that these CFOs are going to just get a percentage or a cut of every single client that they service. So it then becomes very scalable and a lot more flexible, that I don't have to necessarily stick my neck out, hire someone that's really expensive, then they're not completely filled up. I have to ramp them up for several months where I'm losing cash during that initial ramp up period. I can ultimately allow the client, the person who's delivering the service, ultimately more flexibility to be able to take either one client if they want to work a little bit every single week. Maybe they can take on 4, 5, 6 clients and have like more than 40 hours a week. From my perspective, it doesn't really matter. I want to be able to provide kind of an attractive place for CFOs to be able to work. And so during the initial next couple of years, like with next year and probably the next handful, plan to build this all out initially just through some like 1099 contractors, and mostly finding the best quality CFOs around the verticals that we are servicing that have experience working with very similar entrepreneurial type of companies, whether it's in home services or manufacturing or like B2B professional services or SaaS. And there's obviously a lot of like former CFOs that are in maybe their twilight years and not necessarily ready to retire, but want to take a little bit of work on the side. And that's where I think I can provide this platform, and where I can generate these leads, I can sell it to them. They don't have to necessarily worry about any of the sales, and they can then just perform all the work that they enjoy doing. And then in the future, I'll still probably continue to use some of the 1099 CFO talent in the future, planning to kind of bring it almost 360 back to my original company, where we're going to be building out a pretty comprehensive training program that will ultimately position or prepare first-time CFOs to be able to service clients. And there's a lot of professions out there that maybe they necessarily haven't been a CFO in the past, but they have all of the raw skills. So folks like that are at Big Four accounting, they've done auditing, they are a CPA by trade, or maybe they're like an M&A or private equity analyst where they're valuing companies. They have a lot of that experience. They have all the financial, the accounting knowledge, that they maybe just haven't actually truly sat in the CFO position before. So planning to then build out kind of a team of like financial analysts that would then support more of these CFOs. And then it would be a natural career progression to move from like a financial analyst at a company where we're supporting a lot of these CFO relationships. Then you can start to build out your own CFO team. And then I build those out from like a W-2.
I love it. I think that's really, there's a lot of good insights into that plan. First of all, I commend you for having such a specific plan. I think a lot of people in their first year or two are a little more loosey-goosey with what they actually think they're going to do as far as like a strategy to get there. I'm sure that's influenced by, you're running a company before this and being in the EO world, EOS well, and there's some good stuff there. The other thing too, I'll say is like we've had, both of my companies have had a lot of success with that same model of hiring where we start people off as fractional part-time people and then work them up to full-time as we can afford it. And while it's certainly, some people look at that as like, well, there's no way I'm going to find great quality CFOs who want to do this part-time, but the truth is the world's a big place, right? And like you said, there's people in their twilight years. There's probably people who just had a child that want to work part-time for a while they, like get to spend time with their kid. Like there's a lot of personalities and just like life seasons where people may just want part-time work. And the option to get good part-time work is sometimes very limited for certain roles. And so we found, with people like editors and writers and marketers, a lot of them want to take a step back and work 10, 20-hour weeks so they can go write a book or do some other creative pursuit or spend more time with their families or whatever. And that's a great opportunity for us to hire them part-time. And maybe if things change over time, we can bring them on full-time or maybe not, just depends. But anyway, so I think you got the right idea there because you're totally right. It helps you control your costs, keep your business fundamentals solid while growing in a way that doesn't force you to have to grow in these big step functions, right? Like you don't have to have 10 clients lined up to fill up a CFO's roster to then bring one on. You can have like 2 or 3 and, just pass them a little bit at a time.
Yeah. And elaborate even further on that. I mean, it's difficult to find great talent and to make really all-star hires. I mean, you can think that, hey, I've got a lot of experience with like interviewing and finding great talent, but the fact is that it ultimately becomes very challenging to find that and find high quality talent that is going to deliver that service. And so during the early days when we're still figuring some things out, we're still kind of like proving out our entire business model. We're maybe like sub $1 million in revenue. It is for oftentimes for a lot of businesses, very, very chaotic. We haven't figured out everything out, and we're still kind of tweaking our service. We're figuring out that maybe the lead generation isn't really working as well as it should be. So to want to then to stick your neck out, bring on a W-2 employee who actually costs you more money when it comes to like additional taxes, if you need to offer benefits or anything else. And there's ultimately a lot of other compliance, HR laws in place that also bind you by certain issues and create some other issues as well, compared to more of a gradual, while we might not necessarily have as much control and contractors might not necessarily be the best play long-term at the future state of wherever we're ultimately going to get to, maybe in 10 or X number of years. But during that initial kind of like ramp up growth phase, I think it's a really prudent approach, and it helps you to be very mindful and cost effective and hopefully avoid losing cash or just throwing cash down the drain while you're still figuring things out.
Yeah, super. I mean, of course, I'm not surprised you have a good sense of the financial implications of full-time hires because you probably see that on other people's books all the time. But I've seen that mistake a lot of times with really small businesses that they grow quickly and the founder thinks, well, I'll just start, hiring everybody full-time, bring them all into W-2s. And again, it's not that you shouldn't ever do that. Absolutely, at some point, it starts to make more sense. But it is a big financial obligation and legal obligation, and you just have to keep that in mind. Like, are you really ready to make that for longer term? And so it's. I agree. Prudent is a good word for it. Let's talk about briefly the feelings of entrepreneurship, because you've kind of ridden some waves. I mean, you started a business and then sold it, and then you started a new business and it's grown quickly. Like, what has all that felt like? Do you sleep well at night, Chris?
No, I don't.
I don't either. That's why. No, I'm just kidding. It depends on the month. Some months I'm great and I feel like I'm on, the world's on my shoulders. Other months it's chaos. But yeah, how's it been for you?
It's been much better, this business, compared to my first initial business. But entrepreneurship, especially if you are a solo entrepreneur, you don't have another partner, is often very, very lonely. And it feels like you're bouncing ideas off of me, myself, and I, and you have to have very, very thick skin because you're going to go through a lot of rejections. You're going to make, you can't approach it with a large ego because it's going to get deflated and popped almost immediately, and you're going to make a ton of mistakes and fall straight on your face. But if you are resilient, determined, and disciplined, and you believe that you have the opportunity, I think entrepreneurship is phenomenal. I mean, it offers you a lot more flexibility than ultimately any type of employment option. And ultimately, there's no type of ceilings in place. There's no type of dumb bureaucracies that you have to, that you're confined within. And so I love it. At the same time, it goes through kind of waves of emotions where some weeks I feel better than others. But I think one thing that's helped me throughout all of it is surrounding yourself by really good support systems. And I've got an absolutely unbelievable wife, Courtney, that I wouldn't be able to do anything that I do today without her. Having really close family, friends, and hopefully finding other entrepreneurs or other business owners that are maybe in a similar situation to yourself, so that you can at least have a sounding board that you're not alone in any of this. And many times you can learn from their experience and hopefully maybe kind of make a little bit more progress on what you're hoping to accomplish.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's been my experience too, for sure, Chris. Like it feels like waves. And if you talk to 100 entrepreneurs who have been there and done that for 5, 10, 20 years, you'll hear the waves. I mean, one of the things that we do in EO Entrepreneurs Organization is like what's called a, personal lifeline. You basically, everybody in your group will plot out their highs and lows of life over the last 50 years or their whole life, whatever it is. And seeing that with my former mates who are all 10 plus years of entrepreneurship under their belt is an amazing experience to see like the ups and downs they've all ridden. Nobody's had a smooth line that just went up and to the right the whole time. Never happened. People go to bankruptcy and then come back out and they make millions of dollars. And then, like the swings are huge. And I think that's something that I didn't appreciate. And maybe people who aren't entrepreneurs or thinking about this should appreciate is just, you have to get used to the swings. You can't expect all good or all bad. It's probably going to be the best of both, the high highs and the low lows. But you're right. The support network to me is a big part of what gets me through. Similar, have a great supportive wife and family, and I can't imagine doing it without them. But yeah, that's really good insight. Thanks for sharing. I want to ask you a couple questions that I always ask people on the show here about what you're learning and reading these days. So I know you've got a young kid, so you're probably not reading as much as you used to if you're anything like I am. But have you read any good books or any books in the last couple of years that have kind of set you on this entrepreneurial path or influenced you in any big ways?
Actually, before I started my first business, I never had any sales experience. I never even as much as like checked out someone at like a retail store. So like technically kind of a little bit of a sales experience. So I had absolutely zero sales experience. Yet as like an entrepreneur, I think sales, communication are arguably the number one, two, I don't know which order you want to put them in, most important skill sets that you can have. And so I'm constantly trying to be able to just improve my overall sales acumen approach. And one book that I found to be very impactful and super insightful is Gap Selling by Keenan. It's essentially kind of a different sales methodology to being able to just better understand your customers' issues, their current state, future state, the impact of kind of their goals, and that your service you're offering is kind of the bridge to kind of helping your clients or customers accomplish their goal. Other books, and I'm going to only list like 2 or 3. Other books I found to be really helpful: Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits.
Yeah.
It's more of a finance accounting book, but it really kind of boils it down into some really helpful numbers that you should be tracking. Well, obviously
it's for like non-finance people though, which is what I've read.
Correct.
That one too. That's a very approachable way to look at finances. Yeah.
So not necessarily the most impactful, but I always gain a lot of value just learning about how other folks are explaining financial concepts, because I have a tendency to maybe overcomplicate and explain things that in a little bit more elaborate terms and detail. So that's where,
when you're an expert, this is always the challenge. When my knowledge level, if it's way up here, and I'm talking to someone who's way down here, I have to remember all the things that I know that I take for granted that they don't know, right? And so I have to like wind it way back. And sometimes I forget how far I have to go. It's like explaining, this is a silly analogy. I was trying to explain to my wife how vacuum tubes worked in computers the other day. And I was like, oh man, I mean, we've been out of college many years. She has not taken an electrical engineering course, so she doesn't think about circuits and electrons and like any of that stuff. Not that I do either, but just like going back to fundamental, I'm like, oh man, I got to walk this way back. And I was like, normal people, quote unquote, don't think about electrons and ones and zeros and binary and stuff like that very often. But anyway, I imagine finance is a similar topic. You can easily get deep down in the weeds when in reality, I'm like way up here in, beginner land.
Yeah, no, it's an easy topic that can get confusing very, very fast. And so the more articulate that you can be about explaining concepts, frameworks, and like super simple layman's terms, I think the more effective your communication, your messaging becomes. So I'm always interested in learning from other finance thought leaders. So I found that one to be really impactful, helpful. And then just one more I would say is Who Not How by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. It's kind of, I guess, from Strategic Coach. It's a big like coaching community for entrepreneurs that I belong to, but they have some really, really helpful, I guess, frameworks and exercises that you can kind of go through to help you to better understand that, hey, maybe I'm not the best person to be able to accomplish this, and more like really helping you to just better and effectively delegate and manage things around you, because ultimately time is finite. I think there's 156 hours in a given week and no one can ever change that. So there's only so much work that you personally can do. And so to be able to scale, to be able to reach that next milestone within your business, you do need to be able to effectively delegate and to hand that work off to the right people. So defining kind of the success outcomes and what's at stake, the measurables, and what it looks like when it's finished, I think is very, very powerful.
Yeah, very good. Great book. I enjoyed that. I read that this last year, actually. Well, Chris, last question I have for you, and I think you're going to have a pretty specific answer for this one, but if I check back with you in a year, what do you hope to have accomplished in the business?
A year from now, I hope that my client roster is completely maxed out, that we have 3 fractional CFOs in addition to myself, that all of our marketing, content marketing is all up and running, and we're generating, I guess, our goals around kind of lead generation per month. And we've got that all in place, and we're continuing to kind of improve all of our content marketing and all of our client service delivery. And those are kind of the major goals.
Fantastic. Yep. I'm going to check back with you and we will see how it's going in a year. Chris, where can people find you to follow up with you, or if they want to learn more about Midwest CFO and work with you possibly, share whatever you want.
Yeah, of course. You can visit us, MidwestCFO.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm sure I'll share all the profiles with Karl, but feel free to kind of ping me on LinkedIn, visit our website. You can schedule time to be able to connect with me, or you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Send out a lot of actionable value add type of insights for really just managing the finances and better understanding your numbers for any type of entrepreneurial growth organizations.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Chris. This has been fun. Always good to catch up with you, and I hope to see you again soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me on today, Karl. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.